Hello and welcome to Simblified, the show where we make half knowledge and misinformation bloody entertaining. And yes, so here we are, all four of us back again to do yet another episode. And in the spirit of what is to come about one of the greatest and most hilarious own goals in geopolitical history, let's start with each of our versions of where we introduce ourselves, as we often forget to do on Simplified, and also give the most hilarious own goal or slash mistake we've made in our own lives. So, hello, I'm Sriket. And the most hilarious own goal mistake I made in my life, actually, I was very offended by the fact that my mother and sister laughed at me for having very long eyelashes, like a girl. So I decided at the age of 5 to take a big ass course, that yellow orange scissors you used to get.
Holy
Took
shit.
that, grabbed hold of my eyelashes and cut them down to the eyelid. I am very grateful that I am not blind yet, but said incident happened.
This spawned the famous cricket rivalry between Ahmedabad and Bangalore, known as the Lashes, where they.
Oh!
Well done. Well done. Yes. It was hilarious because afterwards I realized that I was not doing something right. And later on, my mom and sister are looking at me and they're saying something's wrong with him. No, something's different. I can't tell what. And it took them a while, and then they both got shocked. And then later on, this is prior to the age of Google, very, very worriedly wondering for about a fortnight whether eyelashes ever grow back, because nobody in the history of humankind had ever cut your eyelashes. So, like, really strongly wondering if they ever grow back, and they did with vengeance. So, well, it worked out all well eventually. So yeah,
So now
that
how
is
frequently do you trim them?
not since that fabled episode. It is probably like, I mean,
It's a
now
very
that you think about it,
mid-30s male thing to discuss.
eyelashes are probably the only hair on your body that people don't trim, right? Like everything else
The
is
sound
up
of
for
crickets
trimming.
that you hear over there is basically the four of us not wanting to reveal more about our grooming.
But we had a neighbor who was completely bald and had the bushiest eyebrows you would ever see. So, as one of Spike Milligan's books says, in moments of emotion, his eyebrows could be seen as far south as his chin. So he's that kind of a guy. And
Oh, man.
One day, so we're kids and everyone's like outside, and this guy comes along, and one of my dad's friends are also there. He's basically taking his case. So he told him, I found that very funny. I mean, it's kind of thing a 6-year-old would find funny. He says, he was telling him, why don't you grow your eyebrows and comb it back, and then you have a full head of hair. So for some reason
Fabulous.
I found that.
Oh man, super.
Too much.
Okay, next, Tony, go ahead.
Oh, okay. When you wrote on the group and I was in a hurry, I actually read it as Owen goal, and my favorite Michael Owen goal.
Hey, man.
It's a good way to appeal to the Liverpool fan.
Yeah, although you could say about your favorite football own goal also, that also works. But in this case, you could diverge into the other things also. Go on. Huh?
Any great anecdotes like you do, but like probably one of the many times I embarrassed myself on stage whenever I did an open mic. But I remember this like strange incident from school when I was just telling Emma yesterday that we didn't have Halloween when we were growing up. Our Halloween was when you got the maths answer sheet. Like it's trick or treat. And most always it is trick, because your parents are never happy because you haven't scored full marks. So my dad looks at my paper and I think I got like 16 on 20 or something, and teacher has cut some 2 marks because I have not written steps for some 1 or 2 mark answers, like a series of them. So my dad looks at the paper and he's like, why has she cut marks? I'm like, apparently I didn't write steps, I just wrote the answer. They're like, it's very obvious what the answer is. I know, but then he took my answer sheet and instead of signing on it, he wrote a long letter to the teacher saying,
Oh my
what are you
God.
doing? These answers are very obvious at a glance. Why are you cutting marks for my son? So from that day on, that teacher always used to call me at a glance and like look at me very super seriously. So,
Wow.
I was like, thanks, Dad.
No, but I was just clearing out my other house and I found this old paper which I had written during my graduation. So, in graduation, when I was doing my BA, I did this. We had to convert a historical event into a one-act play, right? And we had to like write it down like with the play and characters and everything like that. And this was when this was my redemption arc where I was actually like nerding out on studies and I wanted like full marks on everything and like fully going gung ho for all of this stuff. So I got my paper back and I got the highest in the class, which was 18 on 20. But then I realized why I lost. So the highest that the prof would anyway give would be 19. But I realized why I lost 1 mark was because when I turned the sheet, my first sheet, there was not a single mark in the entire one act play. It was perfect and the prof liked it and in the end wrote like very glowing notes and all that. Said -1 mark because I left a blank page. Like I took this, I printed it on paper, na? Piche wala side is blank. So I printed only one-sided and submitted. And there, the prof is also written very nicely that -1 mark, go plant a tree to cleanse your soul or something like that. I was like, the hell I got? Yeah, I lost mark for carbon footprint.
That was literally a
So,
carbon
yeah.
credit only.
Yeah. So it's some ridiculous shit, dude. But anyway, so sorry, I
Oh,
just
man.
reminded when your dad note. Yeah. But
That was
yeah,
amazing.
Chuck, go on.
Well, if a self goal is about willingly embarrassing yourself in front of a large audience week on week, then I think we know we all know what a cumulative self goal is. But I was thinking about this, and I guess for me, it's a school thing, right? So when I moved to India from the Gulf back in 2000, it was like a completely novel, different experience for me, right? The culture was different, the people were different, the standards of marks were completely different, and all that. And everybody was speaking in Malayalam, and I was like a bit of an outsider. So I thought, okay, let's do one high impact activity. I don't know what got me into the state of bravado. Okay, so I had taken computer science in my 11th and 12th, and the teacher asked all the new kids to introduce themselves. And I do not know what got into me in those 5 seconds. I got up and said, my name is Deepak, and I want to be the next Bill Gates. I have no idea what came into me at that point of time. And much like Tony was subsequently christened, at a glance, I was called Bill Gates for a good part of my 11th stand. But I also have I have another story. It's not an own goal really, but it's similar to the teacher sort of thing. And it's, I really love this little story. So when we were in ninth or 10th, I forget which, we had a very nice English teacher back in Bahrain. And she was just teaching us about things that are beyond verbs and adjectives and all that. So we started learning about gerunds and things like that. So there were a bunch of us who started snickering around the word gerund, not because it sounded raunchy or something, just because it sounded damn funny. And we're like, what is this thing? It can't decide whether it's an adjective or a verb or whatever shit it was. And, the joke between us and the teacher, she was very good-natured with all of us. She'd always say, oh, we don't know what a gerund is. Like, will somebody please explain what a gerund is? Will a gerund make up its mind what it is? Stuff like this. And finally, in the last exam, again, one of those I don't know what got into me moments. I think it's a mock exam or something. I wrote on the side of the whole thing. It was great studying under you. P.S. I still don't know what a gerund is. And the paper that she gave back, she actually sat and wrote out the entire answer as to what a gerund is with 2 examples and said, if you still have further queries, please don't hesitate to contact your nearest English teacher. And that was still one of my favorite memories from school when that happened. I wish I had the paper with me, but I had to give it back. School.
You realize at this point we can turn this into a full episode.
Own goal number 1, I was very early childhood. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. And my school was about maybe like 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers away. And I was supposed to go and come back by bus. So I had a BST bus, some princely sum of 10 paisa was the ticket. And there was another boy who was like 4 or 5 years older. He used to go walking. So he told me that if you come walking, you can save that 10 paisa and you can buy something and to eat, buy sweets or whatever. So I said, fine. And, I sort of knew that if my mom found out, there will be hell to pay. So I came back, day 1, day 2, nothing happened. Day 3 or so, the boy also realized that he's taking practically a toddler walking 2 kilometers. He might get into trouble. He told me that regardless of what happens, don't tell your mom that you came walking from school. So I went home and I told my mom, mom, I came by bus today. my, my mom said, why are you telling me this? So then she put me under the license. You're supposed to come every day by bus. Why is it special today? And then I broke down, cried, and I had to tell them. That was it. So that was one. So keep your stupid mouth, big fat mouth shut type thing. And the second one was, there was this guy in our class named Prahlad. Okay, so Prahlad, so I just randomly, it has no bearing on the plot of the story. So we had a art teacher, a drawing teacher who was really committed to his job. He wanted, so standard drawing back in the day was those, you have two mountains, one sun in the middle and one house and one stream, right? That was the standard drawing. So this guy would say, no, you can't draw things like that. You have to use your imagination, draw things. And, you talk, he gave a big talk. So then he told the class that draw something from your imagination. So then they asked this Prahlad. So Prahlad, what would you like to draw? So Prahlad, being some aspiring comedian, said, I would like to draw a donkey. So immediately when you say words like donkey and all, the whole class is then splits. Like this is like George Carlin and Louis C.K. rolled into one. Prahlad was at that moment. So the guy said, okay, you can draw a donkey. So we had a lesson in our Bal Bharti about a guy who went on a donkey to the market or something. So he started pulling that book out because he wanted to copy the donkey from there. So the sir says, no, don't look at a book, look at my face and draw the donkey. And I had a very loud laugh. So I laughed very loudly. And till that time, nobody had really realized. The moment I laughed, everyone started laughing. So I got punished.
You paid the penalty for being quick-witted.
And having a rather loud laugh. Yeah, that also. So yeah.
Fabulous.
That was wonderful. 14 minutes into this episode and we still haven't mentioned the word Theresa May. Fantastic.
Oh man, but excellent.
The leches is still fresh though. Leches diving.
Leches is still fresh, yes. So speaking of which, yes, as the quick on the uptake, like Naren people who are still with us 14 minutes into this podcast would have picked up that this is all about the UK government crises. Now, the first and foremost thing I want to talk...
Well plural, by the way. Well plural.
Yeah,
yes.
Well plural.
So this is what I say is UK government crises with an E, not an I over here. Primarily because if you were even to go to Wikipedia and write UK 2022 UK government crisis, it leads you to a disambiguation page. Right? There's a disambiguation page over there. Because there is a July crisis, there is a leadership election after the July crisis, there is a mini budget that happened after that, then there is the resignation of Liz Truss, and following which another leadership election. So all of these are three different topics. So Wikipedia itself, I think now...
Is there a May crisis, not to be confused with Theresa May crisis?
Well, there was the May crisis led to Boris Johnson, which led to the July crisis.
Yeah, disambiguation, like May 22 or Theresa May crisis. Like, which one do you want?
One of my favorite tweets from this entire saga is a timeline graph. Number of Elizabeths leading the United Kingdom. At the beginning of the year, it was 1. Then it became 2. Then it became 1 again after the Queen conked. And then it became 0 after
0. Yeah, severe, like a lot of volatility in the Elizabeth name this leadership situation. So yeah, so like, that's what they
break
said.
It down all for us.
Yes, so there is, so like I said, the disambiguation page. So I'm going to take the lead from that disambiguation page and break the crises down one by one. And here is where first things first, I'm going to talk about the biggest crisis of all, and I want you to take all that we are going to cover with the background of Brexit. All right. Brexit is actually got very little to do with the direct impact of the crisis. Although it's the background of the overall clusterfuck that is the UK, and everything is going to shit because of that. Like they said, okay, we did Brexit. Now we need to top it and again and again. So that's where all the other stuff comes in. So just take Brexit as the background of all the cluster fuckery that we are going to cover.
They're such overachievers, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they went above and beyond in every which way, right?
They are Greater Britain.
Yeah, they're Greater Britain, exactly. So we begin as all shitty things do with Boris Johnson. And again, just giving the background with Theresa May. Theresa May called... so the Tory party has been in a great... a brilliant own goal mode for a long time, where even Theresa May actually called for a snap election in which she lost her mandate, which later on, like, she had to resign for. And then when Boris Johnson came, he called another general election in which he won an overwhelming mandate. Now, so everyone's like, oh, Tories are back on top. Sorry, just give you a little context. Tories, when I keep saying Tories is the Conservative Party of the UK. When you think Tories, think Republicans from the US. Somewhat similar, except less crazy and crazy blonde leaders are common, but
largely white.
Yeah, largely white, but also not as much in the UK, huh? We might need to give them credit for that. So when you think Tories, think Republicans. That's the Tories, the name for the Republicans in the UK. So the Tory party called a snap election, won a huge mandate under Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson got this huge mandate under this whole thing that I will get Brexit done. Boris Johnson got some approximation of Brexit done, which was which is basically like, as all, I mean, in all seriousness, political commentators say UK is the first and only country in the history of the earth to impose economic sanctions upon itself. Right. So
this
which is what they did.
Of Chuck, I think your reprisal of Political Animal, where they talk about the ironic immigration.
The ironic. Wow, you remember that? Wow. Okay, what Tony is referring to here is a short-lived series between John Oliver and Andy Zaltzman, which unfortunately is not there on the airwaves anymore, and nobody can find it, including the Bugle producer who I mailed for this. And it basically, a long story short, in order to defend Britain's borders, these guys came to the conclusion that they actually needed to hire outsiders to work. So hence the world's first ironic immigration policy. I'm not doing it justice. If I eventually find it, I will obviously tweet about it. It's time to bug
so
Chris from
they
the
do
Bugle
an
again.
estimation of the coastline and say to put one person at each point, it costs X amount. And
X amount, yeah.
How it is ironic. But basically same thing has been repeated. But
also, we will revisit this when this xenophobic attitude with the elevation of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, but we will come back to that. We'll get there in the end. But yeah, so here we have Boris Johnson, who got Brexit done in some way, and they imposed economic sanctions upon themselves. But largely, actually, the British public were happy that Brexit got done, because, well, most are not informed about what the long-term consequences are and who has patience to go through these boring things. So they got Brexit done. Then, obviously, to make things worse, as happened with the Sri Lanka situation, the pandemic happened. And pandemic was just like pouring kerosene on the fire kind of situation, where Boris Johnson also, in his own capacity, went and did ridiculous things, like saying that he tried to talk about like how you should stay away from people and you should maintain social distancing, while in an effort to show how famously casual and comfortable he is with people, went and shook hands with COVID patients and promptly got COVID and went to the ICU himself. And then, so he did that. They developed a £4 billion test and trace system, which they wanted to kind of trace patients with and all that stuff, where they would test people and trace them. The system didn't work because they based it on like old these things, and the entire system had to be scrapped. So literally 4 billion down the drain, right? So that they did. And finally, there was one of the most hilarious situations which came with Dominic Cummings, right? So Dominic Cummings was this minister, he's almost like this Rasputin-esque minister under Boris Johnson, who didn't really hold any position, didn't really hold any portfolio, but was like this senior advisor, senior leader kind of guy. And he was like he did whatever he wanted to. So during the pandemic, he went out with his wife and child to go see a beauty spot in the nearby area or something like that, go for like some scenic holiday. And later on, like when they got caught, and obviously there was like some pretty damning proof against him, Boris Johnson did not sack him. Like that's why Rasputin is cold. Like despite this damning evidence, he'd never sacked him. And finally, the story that he gave was he went and drove 50 miles from his home with his wife and child because he thought his eyes were not working well and he wanted to test his eyesight out by taking a ride. I'm not even joking anywhere here. This is the legitimate story that they sold the British public, that he took that drive because he wanted to test his eyesight. So, yeah, he might as well have taken out a pair of scissors and cut his eyelashes. So that was the Dominic Cummings, which Boris Johnson defended like very staunchly. That happened. And then all of this backgrounded by what is called the cost of living crisis, right? That started in the UK. Now, this got exacerbated by obviously the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia stopped supplying natural gas to the UK and other European countries. The price of energy started spiking, and that has caused a cost of living crisis along with the pandemic, which is already screwing people over. So there's a cost of living crisis going on. But funnily enough, as happens with most democracies these days, none of the hard issues ever topple politicians. It's the stupid stuff, right? And the key stupid stuff that toppled Boris Johnson is what they call Partygate, right? So he basically, during the pandemic, Boris Johnson and his cabinet and his advisors and his council of ministers and all the other people working around him, around 10 Downing Street and the other areas, they decided to have not one, not two, not a dozen, but 16 parties, right, over the course of the pandemic. So 16 parties, which they had at a regular basis, ranging from Boris Johnson's birthday to some other smaller spokesperson's birthday, to joking about it to the press also. Like there's a clip of the official spokesperson saying, I guess you could call it a party, like literally admitting that they had parties during the pandemic and stuff like that. And even having visual, like, the thing is this, all of this is not even like it's speculated, or there is like actual visual proof of this. Like there's a picture of Boris Johnson sitting wearing a party hat while there's a guy next to him covered in tinsel, right? Like there's literal party evidence. There's a cake, there's a plate with a cake on it and all that stuff around that. So there's all of this stuff going on. So now, and the thing is, Boris Johnson flatly goes in parliament and says there were no parties. Because like up is down, black is white, water is hard. All of those things are happening in the UK at this point.
His own party doesn't really exist as an entity anymore. There is no party.
Yeah, exactly. So all of this going on, then Partygate starts. Now, so Partygate has like completely tanked his reputation. However, as we've seen with a lot of right-wing parties around the world, public reputation is their least of their concerns, right? Like, I mean, people think we're evil, who cares, right? As long as we have power and we are able to maintain our base and all that stuff. But here is where this starts affecting. So there are a couple of like small by-elections in a couple of counties, very British sounding counties like Chesham and Amersham and North Shropshire and Tiverton and Honiton and Wakefield. So all of these places have like their by-elections, and these are all safe Tory seats, and the Conservatives lose them all with a big margin, right? So then the Tories also start getting affected by it. And coupled with that, obviously, it's not just one scandal. Then there's a dude called Chris Pincher, who is the Conservative Party chief whip, who sexually assaulted 2 men for the funds. And Boris Johnson also decided to defend him. So all of this combined, there's like a major outcry. Labour asks Boris Johnson to resign. He says no. The senior Tories asked Boris Johnson to resign. He said no, and he sacked Michael Gove, who was the Secretary of State for Levelling Up and all. He sacked him because of lack of loyalty. Everybody threatened a no confidence motion against him. He still said no, right? Then literally everybody in his cabinet and all the ministers in all departments, everyone resigned. So about 50 odd ministers from across ministers, undersecretaries, everybody resigned. Boris Johnson still, the day they resigned, the night he was still saying he won't resign, right? And finally in the morning, he was like, I don't have a government anymore to govern. Like there's literally nobody here. So what do I do? So then afterwards, in fact, it got to a point where one of the ministers, the Secretary of State for Education, resigned. Boris Johnson instated a new Secretary of State for Education, Michelle Donnellan, who resigned after 2 days, making her the shortest serving cabinet member in British history, right? And
everyone's just doing it for records now.
Yeah. At this point, they're all like, "Kaun sa record baki hai?" Like very Kohli-esque. Yeah. So then afterwards, after everybody resigned, Johnson then goes on PMQs, which is Prime Minister's Questions, and says, I will leave office with my head held high. So this is where the head held high comes in. So this is the first point of the overall crisis. Everybody in the whole government resigns. And when Boris Johnson resigned, there were actually serious conversations within the Tory party itself. Like Labour at this point is just going nuts. They are like, kya pagalpan chal raha hai? Right? But the Tory party is like, should we like throw out Boris Johnson right away because he's an insane person? But the Boris Johnson said, देखो भाई मैं resign कर दिया, and he went on holiday. Must. So he's like, screw it, ठीक है, तुम्हें जो करना है करो, and he went on holiday. He's a sitting MP, when the crisis is going on. He's just like, screw it, मेरा हो गया, मैं जा रहा. So he's gone. So he goes on holiday, and then they have the leadership election. So all the Tories come together, they take 3 weeks and have a leadership election. All this while Labour is crying itself hoarse and saying, we want no confidence motion, no confidence. Tories are like, shut up, we'll do our own thing, you shut up. Then they obviously have the leadership election. Leadership election, 2 major candidates, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Now, Rishi Sunak was Boris Johnson's chancellor. So he was the chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the second man in command, basically.
Hey, if he came to his party, it would have been Chancellor Pay Dance.
Chancellor.
Didn't get that right exactly. It was better in my head, but
as most things are, Chuck.
If you got fired, you would be ex-exchequer. Yeah.
But yeah.
If Boris Johnson's party was an S&M party, what would the difference between that and Chris Pincher have been? One would have been a party whip, the other would have... Okay, never mind. Move on. Let's move on.
No, but this is what this is what actually Dominic Cummings in like private conversations actually said about when Chris Pincher's scandal came out. Like within the party also they were talking. Dominic Cummings gave a statement saying he's a pincher by name and pincher by action also.
With a name like Cummings, he should keep his mouth silent. Please move on. Move on to the sane part of this conversation. But before the sane part of the conversation, should we take a little break to regroup?
Oh, for sure.
Ourselves?
Yeah. Then we are coming to the craziness has just begun. So let's take a quick break and get right back to the madness that is the UK crises.
Welcome back to the simplified look at post-Brexit UK, I suppose. In the first half of this conversation, Sriket was telling us about the legacy, as it were, of the final few days of Boris Johnson, the man who John Oliver once described as Bam Bam from the Flintstones with a British accent.
That is so accurate.
That works for his like way of getting things done also, not just the way he looks. But my favorite part about the end of Johnson was when he was outside with a cardboard box with his friend Rahul Ligma. Ligma and Johnson.
Yeah. That was amazing.
Sorry,
Anyway,
what was this?
so-
I don't know this.
This shall be covered later. This is one of the,
Okay,
this is
it'll
one
be
of the
covered
things that we
later,
should
okay.
cover later. Sriket is now going to talk to us about an ironic prime minister. And I say ironic prime minister because, as every self-respecting engineer knows, a truss is a symbol of rigidity. And if
She was following in the footsteps of Margaret Thatcher, who was known as the Iron Lady of Britain. So,
there we go.
Well,
So an iron truss.
yeah. But yes, so they had this leadership election where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss were the key competitors, and Indian news channels all drove themselves nuts
Yeah.
at that time itself. Like, oh my God, Rishi Sunak has a chance of becoming. And then basically when Liz Truss became the prime minister, everyone's like racism. That's why Rishi Sunak did become prime minister.
At this point, we must note that Rishi Sunak actually went to some temples and all and started doing puja and stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know if this was the time we went to Vidyarthi Bhavan also. But anyway, Vidyarthi Bhavan is a famous dosa place in Bangalore for the non-Bangalore aligned. But yes. So anyway, so
it was also around this time that he gave Virat Kohli the prize, no?
the prize.
I don't
Oh
know.
my God.
Okay, so for anyone who didn't get that reference, there's this old picture of Ashish Nehra giving then school child Virat Kohli a prize.
And Ashish Nehra is famously same guy as
Same
Rishi
guy
Sunak.
as Rishi Sunak. And India wants to know those troublemakers who masquerade as a as a quiz account. They tweeted this out saying Rishi Sunak giving Ashish Nehra a prize. And of all people who had to fact check this would be the only person to score 3 centuries in his first 3 test matches, one of India's greatest ever captains. Mohammad Azharuddin saying, please don't believe everything you see on WhatsApp.
He's like the real person in the picture is Ashish Nehra. But it is well within Mohammad Azharuddin's character to fix things. So he just...
ouch. Oof. And he flicked that on the leg, right? Runs close. Okay.
At a leg glance.
Okay. Trust.
So here we have once the leadership election concluded, obviously Liz Truss won, and she proceeded to then get poor thing goes straight up to go form a government and asks Her Majesty's permission for it. Her Majesty gives permission and promptly bids adieu a couple of days later. At which point, so that's where they already, there was like a large conversation. And imagine, I mean, if this was India, I mean, even in the UK, there was a lot of conversation about like Liz Truss being a panoti who killed the queen. And imagine if this was India, then there would have been all kinds of like Kala Jadoo shows everywhere. So, but
if this was India, let's face it, none of these guys would have resigned. They would have asked the other side to go take a long walk, or they would have all been in jail or something like that.
Excellent.
But the major sort of discussion point at this time is the cost of living crisis, is it?
Cost of living crisis. And that's
okay.
So exactly. So the first thing she does, and the main thing that is on the agenda for Liz Truss as soon as she's brought on board, is she needs to kind of ease this cost of living crisis that's like going overboard. And so I'll give you a very brief overview. I think it's a very important overview to understand this cost of living crisis, about why Liz Truss like imploded as quickly as she did, right? So the first thing she did was she got on, and the most important person in this Liz Truss cabinet was her finance minister or chancellor of the exchequer, who she put a guy called Kwasi Kwarteng, right? He's a black guy with the Jamaican and mixed English heritage. Again, really, really qualified guy, but famously in cahoots with all the bankers. He does a couple of things which set off like a real tsunami as far as the UK economy is concerned. So I'll give you a quick explainer of this. Like, I kind of boiled it down. I made a quick explainer of this. So like I said, the most important thing which is causing the cost of living crisis is the energy bills. So the gas companies and the electricity companies are raising electricity costs constantly. And that's causing a lot of problem for the UK consumers. So what they did was, these guys said, okay, we will put a cap on how much the gas companies can charge for electricity. So for example, as it happens, gas companies get oil and gas at a cheaper rate. They sell it as electricity and charge a premium on it, right? So let's assume they're like buying electricity for 10 bucks, 10 pounds, selling it at 15 pounds, right? Right now, because of the crisis, the price has gone, the buying and purchasing price has gone to 25 pounds and they're selling it at 30 pounds, right? So what the UK government said was, they capped the price and said, irrespective of however high the purchasing costs of oil and gas go, your prices cannot go over, say, 50 pounds, right? 50 pounds is the cap. Now, this is what is but that's a great thing, but that's a good thing overall, but it's a shitty thing because unlike a lot of economies, like even India has this, India has what is called a tiered electricity system, right? So the first 100,000 units are charged at a certain subsidized rate. The next 1,000 units are at an exponentially higher rate. And the 1,000 units after that are at an exponentially higher rate than that. So what it does is, the people who are using, like households that are using like less amount of electricity, which are the poorest households, will get subsidized electricity, and those who are taking more electricity will get charged at a higher rate. These guys decided to put this flat cap on electricity with no tiering system. So what that does is, the houses of the poorest people's households, they save very little money, but the richest people actually can save a huge amount of money on electricity. Companies, corporations, or businesses, all that can save huge amounts of money, and they don't even have an incentive to use less. So in a time when there is like a shortage of electricity and power and energy crisis is going on, they're actually incentivizing people to use more energy. the richest people to use more energy. So what that did was, and all of this interconnects. So it's actually a very beautiful interconnection that happened. So one is the
So
cost of
literally
energy
power
crisis
was concentrated in the hands of a few rich people.
of the richest. Exactly.
Well done.
So that's what happened, that where that corresponded with, and how they sold it to the power companies was that we will basically, for the losses that you will incur, all the losses that you will incur as far as procurement costs are concerned, we will give you government bonds for that, right? Bonds which are 10 years, this thing, which is basically a loan from the government saying that, acha, we'll pay it back to you later, whatever. This is a 10-year government bond. Now, here is
Government
where
bond from
things...
UK is not James Bond.
Yeah.
Just clear.
No.
MI5, yeah.
Had to get
Yeah.
that
I
one
mean,
out of it. Yeah.
they depreciated just as badly, though. So what happens is with these bonds, while these bonds would normally be quite valuable because the UK government is a stable government and all that stuff, and they'll pay back their loans and all that stuff, the interest rates, as they start issuing a lot more bonds, the interest rates started crashing. Right. And the interest rates crashing, which crashed even more because of the fact that investors around the world lost confidence in the UK, because the UK was issuing so many bonds that the pound collapsed compared to the dollar. So where the dollar used to be much more cheaper than the pound, the UK pound, it crashed compared to the dollar. In fact, the dollar became more expensive than the pound for the first time in history. Right. And at this point, the bond market entirely collapsed, which caused that whole thing about where currency depreciation went up, and that's in turn causing the energy bills to go up even further. So this negative cycle happens on one side. Now, to like already a very explosive situation, part of that mini budget that Quasi-Quadrant released is he's like flat, no slabs, a flat income tax cut. So he's cutting government revenue even further. Now they don't have any money. They're issuing bonds because they don't have money, and they're cutting off any way that they can earn money also by reducing income tax. And finally also that there was a limit on, like, different kinds of policies were also there where they had limits on bankers' bonuses, like how much bonus a banker could get and all that stuff. They removed the cap on all bankers' bonuses. So bankers could get as much bonus as they wanted. So that also, again, and that too tax-free. So, I mean, clearly what they did was this, they said, okay, this is classic. This is what is called classic trickle-down economics, saying let's make the rich richer and they will make everyone else richer in whatever way. And in fact, it in turn caused like IMF to like release a statement like UK is a third world country, that these policies are going to ruin your economy. The Bank of England, which is an independent entity entirely, had to step in and buy a whole bunch of UK bonds to prevent the interest rates from collapsing because of this whole situation. And coupled with that, like all of this happening alongside that, these guys are still sticking with, no, we will not. This is 20 days into the entire tenure, 25 days into the tenure. They're standing strong. We will not repeal any of these. These will cause short-term problems, but long-term gain. Cut to 5 days later, Quasi-Quadrant is fired. Who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer is fired. In his place is Jeremy Hunt. Guy is hired. Jeremy Hunt promptly goes about, literally without asking Liz Truss, reversing all of her policies. Right? Every one of these mini budget policies is scrapped immediately. Liz Truss is literally like one day in the press saying that this particular policy will never be repealed, and next day it's getting repealed. Right? So at which point, like, she is afraid to even turn up in anything. There's one very famous, actually, there's one thing where she refused to go on any of the large stations, like refused to go give the BBC an interview or any of the radio stations an interview. Instead, she said, okay, let me go and talk to like people in smaller radio stations. Those were the people she wanted to give interview. There's a beautiful 10-minute clip on YouTube where she's going and giving these interviews to these smaller radio stations, and these small, like, they're literally one-horse town radio jockeys who are eviscerating her, asking her questions which she has no answers to, and she's like stumbling and hesitating and has nothing more to say. So Liz Truss like completely has lost credibility at this point, at which point is the Daily Star decides to put up a lettuce, a head of lettuce, a head of lettuce, and say which
she should have just started a podcast instead of getting questioned by other people.
So at this point there's a head of lettuce that has come out, and she's sacking like left, and also, I mean, obviously, because like I said, the I'm not mentioning Brexit anywhere still, but there is no need because there is so much. Like even within this, one of our Secretary of States called Suella Braverman has to be fired because in a completely unrelated matter, because problems aren't enough, she decides to break ministerial code and send government confidential emails on her personal email ID. So she has to be sacked immediately. So she gets sacked, and so she gets sacked 5 days or 3 days before.
She gets herself sacked or something, right?
Well,
Isn't there
no,
some
she says
controversy?
no. So she basically, yeah. So Suella Braverman says that she resigned, but Liz Truss and her side said they sacked her. But irrespective of whatever, 3 days later, Liz Truss resigns, right?
Yeah.
And now at this point, like the Labour is just like, ये क्या हो रहा है? General election कर दो. तुम लोग तो पागलपन कर रहे हो. But still, obviously, because the party and this is parliamentary style democracy, the mandate that Boris Johnson has got is now second hand, third hand भी चलता है किसी को भी. So at this point, whoever can be elected, and they have another 2 years to govern without any problems. They still have the majority in the House of Commons, so they can govern as much as they want. So at this point, because they want to avoid backlash, they decide to have a shorter election, and basically the guy who came second, अभी तू ही बचा है, तू ले ले, and Rishi Sunak becomes prime minister, which is what
he's a rightful leftover.
Yeah, rightful leftover, which is what it becomes hilarious to me when people call it, this is the UK's Obama moment. And I'm like, have you seen the clusterfuck that is the UK politics right now? Kahe ka Obama moment? They basically put any warm-bodied person who would do the job.
And then Suella Braverman rejoined under Rishi Sunak.
Yes, and immediately, within a week of having resigned, grossly breaking the ministerial code, a week later, she's rehired for the same job. And this is 3 hours after Rishi Sunak gives his opening speech, says trust has to be earned and this government will be defined by integrity and everything. And he rehires the people who are from the previous government who have all been sacked and fired for different shitty reasons.
In the middle of all this, wasn't there something like our initial chief troublemaker, Boris Johnson, was holidaying somewhere in the West Indies or something, and he came back?
Precisely. So this is where it also happens. The leadership election is going to happen, and the key people are, there's one extra lady called Penny Mordaunt who was supposed to become, who was also in the leadership this thing, and Boris Johnson, who is holidaying still from recovering from his resignation, is holidaying, cut short his holiday from some banana republic, and decides to come back because he wants to become prime minister again. And there's a whole bunch of people who are willing to support him for that also. So, at which point the Tory party says, yaar, ye jada ho jayega, and decide not to reappoint Boris Johnson, who then very, very obviously, very eloquently and very magnanimously says, I am not going to stand again for the prime ministerial. I have the 100 people needed to contest the elections, but I will not do so in the interest of the nation or whatever. So then Rishi Sunak basically, and everyone's saying that the reason why Rishi Sunak got it also is because Suella Braverman, who was power broker despite her this thing, she decided to support Rishi Sunak, and the condition being that you have to rehire me irrespective of anything. So that's where he gets hired again.
She backed the Braverman.
Yeah, she backed the Braverman. No, the thing is, this Suella Braverman is her own thing. Like, does anyone remember this guy called some Miller in Trump's government, who was this like very anti-immigration dude, who was like this very
Stephen
cool
Miller.
Dude, like Stephen Miller. Right.
Yeah.
So Suella Braverman is the equivalent of that.
He looked like one of those leftover characters from Rick and Morty. He like one of those walking sausage men, no? Like,
yeah.
like that shape.
So Suella Braverman is the UK equivalent of her. Like, she said she's herself a child of an immigrant, and this is what is ridiculous. Like, the racists in the Tory party, a lot of them are actually
Preeti
like
Patel
black,
also, right?
brown. Preeti Patel, all of these. Like, Suella Braverman actually gave this statement. So they had a Rwandan refugee crisis in the UK. And this Rwandan refugee crisis, she actually made a statement saying, I dream of the day where I see planes of refugees flying out of Heathrow. Like, she's literally saying, it's a dream of mine that when these refugees will be deported. So, like, that's where she was promptly rechristened as Cruella Braverman. So, as is the want with UK's very snappy naming policies. But one of the most hilarious things about Liz Truss's short-lived tenure was that when got elected as prime minister, there was a book of hers that was going to get released. This book was called Out of the Blue, the inside story of the unexpected rise of Liz Truss. Right. And this book was literally to be released like 15 days
in December
after she resigned. Right. That was the planned release date of her. So it was supposed to be her rise to prime ministership. They had to stop the publication. They had to write a final chapter. And they rechristened that book as Out of the Blue, the inside story of the unexpected rise and rapid fall of Liz Truss. So basically the book has also been rechristened, and now it's going to be re-released with a new chapter about her fall as well.
Amazing.
So yes, so that is.
But can she become prime minister again? Like, once.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Rishi
That is the
Sunak's
beauty
two is
of the.
done.
Yeah. Like Boris Johnson, they
You'll
are
have
all
to add
waiting in
one
the
more
wings. I mean,
chapter then.
yeah, I mean, this reminds me of like the Friends, this thing, right? Like where Friends, I think Joey at one point like says that he's not sure if he slept with a certain girl or not. And then Rachel comments saying that, so basically you've slept with all the women in New York and now you're just going around again. So yeah, the UK is kind of doing that with probably prime ministers at this point. Like they've had, so that's what, no prime minister has since David Cameron left, there's no prime minister that has lasted more than 2 years. I mean, that is also stretching it now. We're counting in months. And as Tony, as you sent yesterday, already, obviously, there are rumblings within the Tory party because again, there is no strong power center anymore, right? So every single person is like, mere ko bhi banna hai prime minister, mere ko bhi banna hai cabinet minister. So everyone's pulling and pushing. So there's already rumblings of discontent within the Rishi Sunak camp. And well, yeah, I mean, one thing that the Tories aren't likely to do is call for a general election. So strap yourself. There's still 2 years of this going on. At this point, I think Rishi Sunak will be will have like 2 rows of prime ministers ahead of him at the end of this probably.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day when Cheteshwar Pujara becomes British Prime Minister because he's practically playing there all the time.
So this is the best part, right? Like also with Rishi Sunak, the more hilarious part is that earlier everyone was feeling very excited as Indian Prime Minister. Later on, all the TV channels are focusing on Hindu Prime Minister because, well, Rishi Sunak's ancestors are actually from Pakistan. So, what is present day Pakistan?
Also his parents were from
Kenya,
like
I
Africa
think.
or something.
Yeah.
Kenya, yeah. So in 1930s, his grandparents relocated to Kenya, and he was, I mean, they relocated to the UK in like 1960s or something, and in 1980 was when Rishi Sunak was born. So he's as British. I mean, he's as British and probably as white as they get. Like, I mean, there's an interview clip of Rishi Sunak where he says that I definitely, like, literally the equivalent of saying some of my best friends are friends with black people kind of situation. So he's giving a similar line where he's like, some of my best friends are middle class, or actually know some people who are middle class. So yeah, he's the richest politician in the UK, and also has now made Narayan Murthy the father-in-law of the nation, which is also another aspect of this whole thing.
Another one I expect everyone to get in their inbox a few hundred times is how when Narayan Murthy, Sudha Murthy and Akshata Murthy move in, it's going to become 10 Downing Street is going to become Teen Murthy Bhavan. That's one.
Murthy
Bhavan. Yeah, so that's see about 100 WhatsApp messages on that. And the funniest thing on this I've seen is somebody sent me a WhatsApp forward saying that so what India should do is when Rishi Sunak comes to Bangalore to visit his in-laws, he's definitely going to get stuck in a traffic jam. At that time, you kidnap him and then you release Ashish Nehra in his place, who goes to the UK, and because he's the Prime Minister, he signs a bill which returns Kohinoor to India. And because they're so similar, no plan B is necessary. So absolutely no plan B.
But yeah, so I mean, now they're already talking about obviously in the Labour Party is constantly demanding a general election. The Tory party is asking probably already planning for the next Prime Minister. And yours truly is just watching with popcorn in hand because this is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Like
this is insanely,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's severely underrated. Watching like PMQs, which is Prime Minister's questions, which is like the Labour leader the opposition leader asks the Prime Minister questions every week. In the UK, I mean, it's beautiful viewing also. Like they're in all politeness just throwing like massive barbs and super shade on each one of them. And these are like 10-minute clips that are absolute must watch. Like they are as good as any content that you could find on the internet. So yeah, that's just, I mean, every week is a lot of fun. Like it's also there a lot of meme-worthy statements coming on. Like the night before Liz Truss resigned, she made a statement saying, I am a fighter, not a quitter, promptly resigning the next day. So a lot of amazing, hilarious stuff coming out from that particular thing. So yeah, that is an overview
Oh.
of the overall.
So far.
Yeah, so far.
And we have
See,
to
that's the thing.
release this episode as soon as possible.
Before
Most
before
likely,
Rishi
yeah.
Sunak goes out.
From
this thing,
2016,
right? Yeah.
we have been tripping over the madness that is Brexit, saying how can it possibly get funnier than this, funnier than this, funnier than this.
But it can.
And the UK just keeps surprising us. So, in the
I mean,
time of a
that's where,
global
right?
pandemic, in the time of rising nationalism around the world, in the time of whatever a crisis all over the world, we thank you, the UK government, for being the funny pages of world politics. I'm going to be very sad the day Keir Starmer wins and the Conservatives are going to be out.
But I have a question. Where is Nigel Farage now? What happened
Yeah, so
to
that's
him?
exactly it, right? Like, so Nigel Farage is he's basically gone from every position of power. He's the guy who actually, so that's what, right? Like, which is what, I mean, I was watching a Brexit video where they said that this, actually, when the Brexit conversation, the entire prospect of Brexit was something even the Conservatives opposed. All of the mainstream Conservatives opposed it, right? It was not the position of the Labour Party. It was not the position of the Conservative Party. It was the position of the UKIP party, of which Nigel Farage was the leader. And now he's no longer the leader. He's no longer in the European Parliament, obviously. And he's basically like a private citizen sitting over there, like chilling and saying, ha, maine kuch kiya aur ho gaya.
Basically, the Subramanian Swami of UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, both Theresa May and Liz Truss had voted to remain, and then they had
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about the
Yeah.
other 5-6.
No, so Rishi Sunak is actually the only guy, Prime Minister so far. Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are the only two people who actually supported Brexit from the start. So even Rishi Sunak supported it from the start. But like you said, in the last 6 years, the most hilarious thing is 6 years ago, the UK wanted to leave the European Union to be more economically secure, to be more, to become a bigger GDP than all the other countries, and to retain their whiteness, so to speak. In that time, pound, which was more expensive than the dollar, has become less expensive than the dollar. Their GDP has shrunk so much that they are now a smaller GDP than India. And they have an Indian origin prime minister. So all objectives achieved. That's what it's a classic snafu. Situation normal, all effed up.
At least they still have a kick-ass cricket team. I think.
That's true.
I don't know.
So that is a quick summary of the British situation. I mean, if you wanted to understand where this nonsense has come from and where it's going, well, believe me, we don't have any clue either where it's going. But whatever it is, I'm along for the ride.
It's a tough one. I don't even know what
Remain,
to
maybe?
say.
Just stay, remain.
Stay safe.
Stay in power, maybe? Stay
in power. Yeah, I was going to say that. Stay in power and stay simplified.